Folks, thank you so much for tuning in as we get to the end of the week here. We've got some wild stuff for you with insights that you're not going to get from behind the scenes here from mainstream media. Let's see. We'll talk about what's the uptick of activity related to Iran. We're just going to spend a couple minutes looking at senior Democrat Party officials now in the U.S. actually starting to panic about how far left the Democrats are swinging. Some wild stats about the WNBA related to Caitlyn Clark. Is it true? And it does appear to be true that in California, the vineyards there are being burned down or plowed under. We'll see what all that has to do with, and we'll look at a Canadian spy situation. I'm not calling it a scandal yet, but we're going to look at that a little bit more. It's wild in Iran. We see as we've talked about, increased activity getting really speeded up with Saudi Arabia now for the first time in history joining the U.S. in terms of pounding back on Iran. And there's a report out that China is preparing to send upwards of 400 missile launchers to Iran. That's going to increase pressure back and forth between China and U.S. Going to get interesting. As we predicted, the Federal Reserve rate, the rate at which government loans and bonds are tied. The head of the Fed, as they call it in the U.S., Kevin Warsh, as we predicted, we said right here, we've been saying for about a week that there would be little or no movement on the federal rate. And in fact, he did put it on hold. There's no increase in the rate. Remember, when the Fed announces the rate, that is the rate at which the government borrows money from huge financial institutions. Okay, this is, people say, where does government get their money? They borrow it. If they don't get enough from taxes and other economic activity, they have to borrow that money. And there are some huge organizations that are big enough to lend money to governments. Those are gigantic pension funds, multi-trillion-dollar funds. Those are huge insurance company funds. And the financial advisors at those particular institutions, like let's say the Canada Pension Fund or a US-based pension fund, they will lend money to the government. Believe it or not, that's where the government gets their money. It's called, and the government then writes a bond. So let's say it's to the Canada Pension Plan. A government, any government can do it, will say to that pension fund, you guys have trillions of dollars. We need to borrow some money just to keep running as a country. So what interest rate will you be happy with? And let's say it's 3.5%. That means what the government does, it signs what is called a bond. And that's what it literally means. It's binding the government. It's like an IOU. And the government will say to that pension fund, okay, here is a 10-year bond. That means 10 years from now, this billion that we're borrowing from you, we will pay it back. And we'll pay it back at compounding interest, whatever that rate is today. So if the government says the 10-year rate is going to be 3.5%, then the financial advisors at that pension fund will say, well, what do you think? Should we lend Canada $1 billion? They say they're going to pay it back in 10 years, and we'll get 3.5% a year in interest. And they'll make a decision. They'll say, yeah, that's good. But as a government, as their government debt gets higher and higher, the risk to who's ever going to loan that money to the government also gets higher. So when you are lending out money, as anybody would do, and the risk is high, you want a higher interest rate every year just to make sure your chances of getting paid back are for real. So right now, the 30-year rate, believe it or not, governments write bonds that they have to pay back in as much as 30 years. And that 30-year rate is the highest that it's been in about 20 years. In other words, these are high rates. In other words, government debts continue to go up. The money that the government borrows from big financial institutions gets more expensive. And folks, we said before, we say again, that the single greatest reason for inflation is government borrowing, government spending borrowed money. This is what is happening right now, and we're going to continue to see that go up. Governments will always try to blame other events for the cause, the need to borrow more. They will say, well, there's a war going on right now in Iran, and that's restricting goods and services, and that's going to hurt government spending, and so we're going to need more money. Government will always come up with reasons that they need to keep on borrowing, and the rate gets higher and higher. Please keep that in mind, and politicians will not speak up against it because most politicians, want to get reelected. So when a politician announced, for instance, well, we're going to increase the amount of money that we're putting into, let's say, social welfare. That's an easy thing for the politician to say. He or she just wants to get reelected. The cost of doing that doesn't figure into their figuring because they think we're going to be gone in, 5 years, 10 years. I won't be here as an MP. I won't be here as an MLA. I won't be here as a city councilor. So, borrow. It just doesn't matter. And remember, that it's the single greatest reason for inflation. When you see a politician of any party announcing new spending, it means it's going to be a little bit harder for you to buy groceries like you used to, or buy gasoline, or put a down payment on that house. Every time, please remember that you see a politician announcing new spending, and it's borrowed money, as it is in almost all governments right now, it's going to cost you more at the grocery store. Remember, this is what's called, this particular policy, one of the main promoters of this way back in the 30s and the 40s was a guy by the name of John Maynard Keynes. That's why you hear the term Keynesian. This is Keynesian economics. It's a part of Keynesian economics. And remember, I've mentioned this before, one day in one of his seminars, a economics student at the university stood up and said, Mr. Keynes, if governments keep borrowing like this, doesn't it mean that everything will government rates will get so high, the interest rates will be so high, everything will collapse in the long run? And John Maynard Keynes said to that student, in the long run, we'll all be dead. In other words, he did not have an explanation for that other than everything collapses. And as I remind all of you liberal Keynesian politicians, yes, in the long run, we'll be dead, but my grandkids won't be. And every year you continue borrowing money, you heap more load on the backs of my grandkids, and I'm not happy with that. What's the solution? Well, one of the few times, certainly in Canadian history, that this was reversed was when Ralph Klein was elected Premier of British Columbia in an election in 1993, and I was part of that government, and Ralph Klein said, it stops now. It stops now. We are not going to increase the amount of money we're giving out to social welfare. We are going to take care of people. People are not going to suffer, die, and starve, but we're cutting back our spending. We're cutting back social spending everywhere. And with that in mind, and then when you do that and you lower taxes, that means more people invest in your province. That means people work harder because they're not getting taxed as much. You eventually actually start to be able to pay down the debt, and which we did that. And I was proud to be and actually humbled to be Minister of Finance when we actually paid down, got our net debt down to zero. It can happen, but we do not have a federal government that has anything like that in mind. It is borrow, increase the cost, and folks, if it's not reversed, it does collapse. Also keep this in mind. Anything government subsidizes will keep going up in price. Anything that the marketplace is promoting will eventually go down in price. When government subsidizes, and this is what makes me so nervous about this insane talk about more and more governments, more and more politicians talking about food security. Nothing can make your food more secure than a free market with competitive pricings in play, which keep the costs down. Not perfect, and our groceries going up. Yes, they are for a lot of factors. But once you get government involved in supplying groceries It's a disaster. Costs everywhere are going to go up. Taxes everywhere will go up. It's insane. And please, it's too late, I think, for the city of New York. They have already started opening their grocery stores. When you hear government officials talking about food security, then just say you want to make sure the marketplace is clear for people who are growing and selling produce. This is crazy what governments are doing. When I was Minister of Social Services, I would go to food bank openings and I would say, I'm very happy that there are places where those who are truly in need and for some reason cannot afford groceries, they can come and they can get free groceries. I said at that time, this was years ago, I'll make this statement, and I'm glad they're there, and I praise the hard work done by those people. But once you supply anything free, the demand will only keep going up. More and more people will want free stuff. You will have people who are always on the borderline, always on the edge, who will eventually capitulate and say, yeah, I'm going to go get those food groceries. And I said then, and this was 40 years ago, I said, food banks, regardless of whether an economy is doing well or not, food banks are only going to continue to grow. Anytime a government provides so-called free stuff, the demand for it goes up, the ability to produce it goes down, and the costs go up, and the taxes go up. And so now we're at a place where we say, well, does it kind of seem like most parties are kind of, somebody keeps promising free stuff. Look what we had in British Columbia and in Ontario when government started promising free drugs, so-called safe sites to do drugs, monitor drugs, make available free paraphernalia. Folks, I said at the time, and people were laughing and scorning me, when you provide and make getting drugs easier, the demand will go up. More people will die. The problem only increases, and that's exactly what happened. And folks, we have to give our heads a shake on this. Now it becomes a matter, since almost all parties, maybe a few exceptions, keep promising free stuff. Now, we used to say we were going to vote, let's vote for the party that will have the best policies. Now, oftentimes I'm saying, I'm going to have to vote for the party that has the least destructive policies so we don't head to collapse faster than we're already heading. Folks, these things make a difference. And you can see it in the United States. Democrats now, with the Democrat Socialists of America having pretty well taken over the Democrat Party of the United States, finally you've got a couple of senior Democrats standing up and saying, it's crazy, Democrats. We're taking socialism way too far. The guy by the name of Mark Penn, many of you who were following the news back in the days of President Clinton, he was a former advisor to President Clinton. And Rahm Emanuel, who was former President Obama's chief of staff. These are two Democrats. They are left-wing. Don't worry about that. They're very left-wing. And they're saying to Democrats, we're going too far. We've gone crazy. We're letting socialism take over. Very interesting to see senior Democrats starting to say it's gotten a little bit crazy. Well, talk about numbers going up. In the WNBA, the Women's Basketball Association, over the weekend, we've got the results in now from the All-Star game. Last year, the results weren't bad in terms of viewership. This year, viewership shot up 44%. Why? Because Caitlyn Clark was playing this year and she wasn't playing last year. And on a similar weekend, every year the WNBA has a three-point throwing contest to see who can get the most three-pointers within a given amount of time. Caitlyn Clark was not invited to that this year, and the viewership for that went down. Where she shows up, the numbers go up. Where she doesn't show up, the numbers go down. And people shouldn't say, well, that's kind of weird. No, in the golfing world, we all know when Tiger Woods was involved and when he was at his best, any tournament where Tiger Woods was playing, the numbers went up, the viewers went up. It's just the way it is. We like to watch the best. And the crazy thing is that ESPN, which carries most of these games, will not acknowledge that the reason the ratings go up is because Caitlyn Clark shows up. Why won't they acknowledge that? Well, Caitlyn Clark and Sophie Cunningham have both made statements, very calm statements, saying everybody has the right to choose their own gender. That's not the issue, but they said there should be no biological men in women's sports or women's spaces, and they get hammered for that. But remember this, folks. This is what's called a 90-10 issue. 90% of people think it only makes sense that biological men, biological boys should not be allowed to compete in girls' sports or go into their washer rooms or shower rooms. Huge majority support that. But because mainstream media is so completely captured by the cultural Marxists and the wokeists of the day, and they have such a loud microphone, people are terrified of speaking out. Folks, we've just got to stand up and start speaking out on this. And I don't mean necessarily in the media all the time. At your home meetings, at your school meetings, in your churches, without anger, without hatred, simply saying we love all people and we love girls and women, and they have a right to privacy in their own shower rooms, in their own change areas, and they have a right to be in competitions where they're not being smashed in the face, and in many cases of physical contact, having their lives threatened by biological males. The huge majority of your neighbors, your friends, people on your street agree with that. Speak up. And I say again, it's a call out to dads everywhere. Dads, I don't have girls, but I have granddaughters, and I get furious. And I think there's some guy who, just because he might have had some of his genitals removed, is going to be maybe smashing my granddaughter in the face, playing a particular sport. That really gets me upset. So folks, please, can we start standing up? Dads, please start standing up in your community. Go calmly and lovingly to the school board meetings, to your sport associations, and speak up for your daughters if you love them, because I know you do. We have to be opposed to this lunatic policy. It's not going away. And unless people speak up, it's going to stay with us. Well, talk about funny policies. In Alberta, there was just a news conference yesterday, and the Prime Minister of Canada and the Premier of Alberta were there, and there's a huge problem right across the country with people in the country illegally, and many students, and they're identifying students from India who come here legally to get a student visa to study here in Canada, and their visa clearly says when you're done your studies, you go back home. And now thousands of them are saying, we don't want to go home. And they're actually holding a hunger strike. They're saying, we're not leaving. And what was the Premier's response? Now, first of all, the Prime Minister's response was, he said, I didn't know about any of this. I don't know how he missed the news. I think he should be getting new advisors or new media commentators, because everybody is aware of this. But the Alberta Premier is very calm. She just said, you know what? Your visas are up. You were invited to come here and allowed to come here to pursue your educational hopes and dreams. We wish you all the best. And now it's time to go home. That's the agreement that you signed. And it's time we had a little more common sense like that in our politics and on our immigration policy. So anyway, we'll see what all comes of that. And it's also interesting that the Premier was good enough and smart enough to say what everybody also knows. But across the country, and especially at the federal level, nobody's willing to say that to illegal immigrants coming from Middle East or Islamic countries. Illegal, and not just that, but people who are committing crime. And it should just be automatic, especially when it's violent or sexual crime, that they go back to the country they were supposed to, where they came from. Politicians of all stripes, there are some notable exceptions, are not speaking up on this. Why is that? Because, I'll tell you why, in some constituencies across the country, there are huge numbers of folks from Middle Eastern countries, and politicians are worried about speaking up about the illegal. We're talking here, violent, illegal, or terrorist related. That's all we're talking about. We're even afraid to speak up about that. Should be sent back. But the reason they don't speak up about it is because there are constituencies, there are seats in the House of Commons that depend on these some of these cities that have very large numbers with distinct tie-in to Middle Eastern countries. Folks, it's time we just spoke up on the issue and did and said what's right. Well, there's a fascinating potential spy scandal. I'm going to call it, yesterday I said I'm not calling it a scandal yet, but we know the name of the woman of Canadian Chinese extraction. Her name is Biwei Zhang. And look, sometimes I'm kind of tough on the CBC. I want to give them credit. They really researched this story. They got information that NATO was not willing to give out, that the Canadian government was not willing to give out. And so I want to credit, there was a couple of reporters, Alanisius Wong and Albert Leung and a couple of others at CBC really did a lot of digging on this. So congratulations to them. One of the things they found when they were doing all this is that in 2024, this woman, I'm saying the alleged and the suspect, was actually the Public Service of Canada was recommending that she not be hired in a particular area because it was found that this is the allegation, that she allegedly committed fraud when she was applying for a very high-level security-related position. And there was a judicial review that dismissed the case. Folks, this is very serious when we have, especially our security agencies, not following through. You got someone who was allegedly involved in fraud and even applying for the job, and she was promoted, got the job, wound up in a very highly sensitive area in NATO. There needs to be further investigation of that. Heads should roll over this if, in fact, this is all true. And we'll see what happens in that particular case. Well, California, out of California, there's more and more news coming that California vineyard owners are either burning or plowing under huge vineyards. Now, burning the crop is a little more restricted for obvious reasons, but they're plowing it under. And why? Why? Is there something wrong with California wines? No, it's kind of a global problem here. The demand for wines is going down noticeably noticeably by Gen Z and millennials. So that's people, from 18 up into the 30s and 30s into their early 40s. They're simply drinking less. They are drinking less, so much less that it's actually affecting one of the biggest wine growing districts in the world. There's also a practice, and this is just talked about, there's an article on this today, called striping. And this is where you go to the bar, you order your hard alcohol drink, and then your next drink, it's not alcohol, it's a fruit drink of some kind. And these drinks they're not cheap. I mean, right now, there's a couple of issues here. So they do this because more and more Gen Zs and millennials are responding to the health issues related to alcohol. The other thing is the expense of it. If you order most places, you easily pay $20 for a cocktail, and you'll pay $18 or $16 for a fruit drink. And the same folks are saying they don't have money to save up for a down payment on a house. Well, anyway, interesting to see if that trend going to continue. Is that going to affect wine growing districts in Canada, like the Okanagan, where I live, or like the Niagara district, where we have, as we call it in the Okanagan, they have a product there that sounds like wine, but really it's the Okanagan that has the best wine. That's what they say. Regardless, is the impact going to be felt as strongly in Canadian markets also? Well, I was just complimentary about the CBC, and now I got to say something that's not as complimentary. There's a column by Adam Zivo, and he's talking about the fact that the CBC was doing a report and a study to see the effects of Ontario finally smartening up and dropping their policy of free drugs and free paraphernalia. And CBC tried to say in their report that came out just this month that actually it was because the government is closing down the free drug supply and the free implement supply that we were seeing deaths, etc., going up. That is a lie. And CBC was proven to be wrong in that. That is not the reason. Anytime I started this broadcast today, anytime government provides free stuff, the social costs and the economic costs go up, folks. Please keep that in mind. On a sad note, today, the case of the lost boy His first name is Parker for reasons we don't fully understand. Police were refusing to release his last name, which might have actually helped or been less confusion in the search. But regardless of that, look, our thoughts go out to the family. What a tragic thing that young Parker was found. He was found dead, and there'll be some more investigation, we think, but just to know that our thoughts go out to that family. There's an article in Faith Today, and it says there's an increased demand in Canada. I don't know, we'll look and see if this is also in the U.S., for Christian retreat centers, for places for Christian retreats where people can get away for 2 or 3 days for no other reason, for a time of meditation and prayer. Meditation, I'm not talking about Eastern meditation, I'm talking about meditation on the biblical word and prayer. Folks, maybe that's a good thought for all of us. A little more time in prayer, a little more time in reflection on the things that are important to a loving God. Thanks for tuning in today. Catch you tomorrow.